Today on the podcast, we have Ben Clemens. Ben is a writer at Fangraphs. And so in this episode, we talk about a lot of different players. We talk about the trades that just went on and what teams were winners and losers. We talk about actually just a lot of different analytics and how to go about evaluating players via analysis. So Ben does a great job. He's a great writer at Fangraphs, and hope you enjoy this one today with Ben Clemens. All right, we now welcome onto the podcast Ben Clemens. Ben, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, first question I have for you is how does someone go from being a trader at Goldman Sachs to writing about baseball full time? Take me through how all that happened.
Yeah, sure. I am pretty mathematically inclined. I've always liked doing that. I always liked, playing games, counting things up and comparing. And that led to my job, like my first job. Um, yeah, which I liked, but it wasn't like a long-term thing for me. I kept doing it and I was like, oh, this job's like fun, but kind of boring. Like everything is too abstract, if that makes sense. Like looking at differences between bond prices, like it's just not as exciting as looking at differences between baseball players and stuff. So I always kind of had in my mind that I didn't want to do it forever. And I just quit in 2019. And not long before that, I had started writing for a fan blog just for free under like a pseudonym. Because I liked reading about baseball and I was just bored. Um, and so I applied to Fangraphs on a whim. I think I'm pretty good at it. Like I think that really helped. Like my fan writing was really good. It was fresh. I really cared. But largely I like doing analysis. Like that's something that I've always liked in my life. And baseball's a pretty good place to do that. So it just kind of worked naturally. I will say I always wanted to write. That's like been a long time goal of mine. And so that was very attractive to me. I think that a lot of people who like analysis don't like writing. It's just like, well, I want to do the analysis, and then it's kind of a chore to like put that to words, show people what it is. This job is really bad if you want to do that. Like, for lack of a better way to say it, like the main thing that I do is not analysis, it's write. It's like it's just a lot of words. I can't stress that enough, but I like that. And so I was kind of looking for a way to get into that. It could have been anything, honestly. Like I like baseball a lot, and I could have just continued to be a consumer of baseball writing and done analysis somewhere else, but it just lined up really well.
What's your process for specifically writing? Because I mean, obviously you have to understand and do the analysis, but then you actually have to, and this is why I think writing is so important because in order for you to truly understand something, in order for you to write about something, like you have to know it very well. So I think it is a good thing that you do write about it. And for those out there too, like I mean, good writing is good thinking. So what's your process like for writing and doing the analysis and everything?
Yeah, I'd say there's kind of two ways it can go. One is the like I have decided that I'm going to write about this player because they're interesting, and I'm just going to see where it takes me. So like I'm going to investigate, I guess I don't know, Brent Rooker is someone who we'll probably talk about later. But I want to investigate this and I want to see what he's doing. And then I have determined that I'm gonna write about what makes him unique or what makes him different from other players. And I'll get to exactly how that is once I figure out what it is. I think that's like one method where it's very writing forward. You do the writing first, get to the other stuff later. Or like you do the analysis kind of like as you're doing the writing, like midstream. So you say, like, I want to write about this guy, cool. Let's do a little analysis. Okay, here's where I'm going. All right, write that part. Okay, what next? Write that part. So that's one option. That's more of a like, let's fill some space because Fangraphs publishes a lot of articles. And I'm writing 4 or 5 a week. That's not actually that easy to do if you're trying to do a big, like, long-term analysis beforehand. It's just not feasible to come with every article that way. The other way is like analysis first. And that is like, I'll come up with some idea that I want to turn into analysis. Maybe I might be curious about how frequently players who hit the ball really hard in the first half continue to do that skill in the second half. Or maybe I'm more curious about how often players who hit the ball really hard in the first half do in the second half. Because I think that's often a more interesting question. Like, hey, you can keep showing this skill, the same skill over and over again, but if it doesn't translate into being good at baseball, no one cares. Um, or no one should care, right? Like that's not really what we're after. And so that's one thing where I'll do this analysis and I'll find out the answer. And maybe that takes a day or two, like answering some question that I want to know about baseball. And I just make sure that I'm doing the analysis really well. And then I get an answer. And then it's like, hey, you have 1,700 words to make this interesting to people. And that's basically what it is. Like I can come up with lots of findings. Like there's a lot of data in baseball, and I can find a lot of things or fail to find a lot of things. I write a lot of articles about not finding answers. And if you don't make it interesting, no one's gonna care. And so when it's analysis first, I'd say I put a lot more effort into like, let's find a way, now that I've done all this analysis, to tell people a story rather than just like say, here's some numbers. Um, I think that that's really important. One thing where I feel like a lot of people, so I had talked to a lot of like kind of contributors to Fangraphs, contributors to Viva Alberto's, where I used to write. I have written a few places other than that, like kind of as a contributor, and I can always talk to my coworkers. And one thing that a lot of people struggle with is like, I'm really good at doing one of two things. One is like laying out my opinion, and two is like explaining the data that I've just seen. But those are boring. Lots of the time, like lots of the time, laying out the data that you've seen is boring. And I've read a lot of things in my like one of the key parts of writing is reading a lot of things and lots of analysis, not of baseball specifically. I actually think baseball's pretty good about this, is boring. It's dry and it's like so much of it is about doing methods and you get 3/4 through the paper and you don't know what it's about and it's not captivating. So I think that one thing that I am pretty good at, that I mean, honestly, a lot of good baseball writers are good at, is that when they write it, they don't come in with like a framework that like I'm going to get through this saying these things in this pace. They have a rough framework and they make it conversational. It doesn't have to be jokes. Like I like telling jokes. Like just in real life, I think that's pretty enjoyable to me. But it doesn't have to be jokes. It just needs to be conversation. Like it has to sound like you're having a conversation with someone. Like this podcast, me and you talking, is a conversation. Lots of articles that aren't are very, very dense, very hard to read, very like here's the block of text, here's the block of text. So I'd say that that's a lot of the process is like, how can I make this flow? How can I like make this feel like it's written in a flow state? How can I feel like when you read it, you can be in a flow state? Just keep going. If something is like I'm referring back to 3 lines above and then like checking back, look at this table, go look back, man, I don't know about you, but I struggle to get through those articles, and it's my job.
How long does it take you to edit? Because I feel like good writing is all about good editing.
Yes, that's true. I'm a one take kind of writer, in that I'm like editing as I go along.
Okay.
So one problem with that though is that when you do that, you are prone to like having the same idea in your head hit over and over again. So like I'm really focused on like some word or some trade-off between two things. And so I look back, like you get to the end of the article and you've written it all, and then like 3 paragraphs in a row make the same point. And it's like,
Mm.
well, I don't know. That's not great. Like, so one thing that I find very useful is I sit there and I like self-edit as I write it. So I'm just writing, just going along. Once that paragraph's done, I don't look at it again because I've been thinking about it as I go. And then once I'm done with the whole thing, I go like take a walk. I live near a park and I have a dog, so like I need to walk her a bunch. So I'll like take a walk with the dog, come back, read it again, and I'm like, oh, this is like I use the word like unbelievable 3 times in this paragraph. That's not good. Like no one would like everyone would notice that when they read it. I just didn't because I was like self-editing as I went along, not going fast. Or I might be like, oh, these transitions don't actually work. They only work because I was thinking in this way when I was doing it. So I do that. But one thing that Fangraphs provides, and like, like professional like writing places provide is an editor. And our editors are awesome. Meg Rowley and Matt Martell, and John Becker before that. Or sorry, geez, sorry, John. John Taylor before them. John Becker does a different thing for us. Um, they're really good, and having someone else read your stuff is really important, uh, or rather, really helpful. If it can't be done, it can't be done. When I wrote, like as a side hustle for a blog that didn't really have an editor, my wife edited my stuff, and I would just like bother her into doing it because I need another pair of eyes on it. Another pair of eyes is really helpful because what's the best way to say this? Like you are very good at following your own thought process. I'm sure this is the same for you. Like I understand my own leaps of logic really well because I'm making them.
Yeah.
Like all the supporting evidence for me is right at hand. Like I've been thinking about it when I saw those points, when I wrote the points earlier in the article, they stuck with me. And so I make a transition and I'm like, oh, obviously, like A is going to B and then B is going to C. And the reason that B goes to C is because of points, these points that I made in the previous paragraph. But the person who's reading it might be like reading it, they might be drinking coffee, they might be looking at something else, they might be reading it at lunch, at work, and eating, or talking to their boss. And focusing on those transition points is something that our editors do really well for me. That's definitely my weakest point as a writer, and it's a point where you can fail. Like there's a lot of points where it's actually kind of hard to fail. Look, if you can fill up words, like you're not going to not have enough content. I feel like I've made that point a few times in different ways, but like not enough analysis or not good enough analysis is not the point where you're going to fail if you're interested in doing this job. At least if you have like an analytical background, which is presumably why you're doing it. Like I doubt that there are a lot of people out there who are like, I'm just an incredible writer. I don't really understand math, but I'd love to write about baseball statistics. Well, like, no, you would do something else. My guess is that people who do jobs like mine are almost all analytically inclined,
Mhm.
and the analysis is likely to be pretty good. Um, you know, every year they have these like Saber Award nominations, and it doesn't go to the same people every year by any means. It's like all up, all over the place, and all of the analysis is really good. Like it's not just like two or three people doing good analysis. There are tons of public side writers doing like excellent, like the thing that they're saying, they're proving. The analysis is right, the math's right. They're doing cool things. There's like 75 public pitch models now. Like that's hard. I can't do that. Like those people are really good at it. There's no shortage of like great analytical minds in the public side of baseball. I think making it intelligible to others is really hard. Transitioning from point A to point B in a way where people can follow your logic, making your logic like followable but also approachable is really hard. Honestly, like I think that's the hardest part of the job. That's like where the editing really comes in, and that's where our editors are so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, first off, a lot of great, interesting points and insight there. I think at least from my point of view, I think what is one of the toughest things is to take something that's complex that you've done a lot of analysis on,
Yeah.
and then simplifying it for somebody who wants to learn and wants to know that information, but maybe doesn't have the background that you have when it comes to the analytics and things like
Yeah.
that. And I think that's very hard. Like you take something so complex, just raw data, and make it simple enough for, a college kid who maybe just is interested, or a coach, just a high school coach, or whoever it is who just wants to learn and is curious about it. I'm sure that's difficult and hard at times too.
Oh, totally. I mean, this is maybe a little inside baseball, but my dad is a statistics professor, or I guess retired, but and he is constantly calling me after my articles. He's like, not enough rigor, not enough rigor. And it's like, well, Dad, like the rigor's like done. It's just done. I'm not going to tell people about it because it's
Mm.
boring. It's boring. You will not get people to follow you if you can't explain it to them. And like you could do like a little methodological aside, but the important part is explaining what you're doing to people. And yeah, I think you said it really well. You got to write to your audience. If you want your audience to be a bunch of like people who have college degrees in mathematics, cool. No one is going to read your stuff, but the people who do will really like it.
That's
That's
right.
fine. I think that like yeah, basically making your stuff explainable and approachable in various ways and thinking about your audience, that's a really good way of putting it, is very important. And I think that that is often kind of underrated, but like it's just important.
You've done a lot of writing, obviously, because of the trade deadline lately.
Yeah.
So a lot about the trade deadline, a lot of different trades and things going on. In your opinion, who's the biggest winner at the trade deadline? Who's the biggest winner, and then who's the on the opposite end of the spectrum too, and didn't do a good job?
Yeah. So kind of got to balance. Like there's two questions to answer. One is like who improved their odds by the most for this year.
Okay.
Um, and I think Dan Szymborski just like ran the numbers in his model, just whose odds of winning the World Series went up the most. And that was the Orioles. I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought that they left a little bit on the table, but did a pretty good job. I think that their expectations hurt them a little. For me, the Cardinals, not just because I'm a homer. Honestly, I don't watch that many Cardinals games anymore. It's tough to keep up with a team who's playing during the day when I'm working. But the Cardinals, I think, if you blend what they gave up and what they got, did really well because pitching was just so in demand this deadline. There was very little good pitching available. People got a lot for whatever they did trade. For whatever reason, the White Sox just got rid of Eric Fetty for pretty cheap, and the Dodgers were able to foot the prospect bill because they wanted Tommy Edman. So I liked what the Cardinals did in kind of improving their team while keeping the long-term trajectory the same. I think the Orioles kind of fit into that too. I thought they gave up enough prospects that I really liked, like Connor Norby, I'm a big fan of, particularly, that I had them just below that. But yeah, those two teams I thought did a really good job. The Orioles more just get a bunch of stuff regardless of the cost. The Cardinals balancing what they gave out and what they got in. In terms of losers, it seems unfair, but like the White Sox did it just like what are they doing here? They didn't get a lot for what they gave up. They need to do something. This is a team who has very desirable players like Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet. Fetty was kind of in demand. Tommy Pham, nice rental bat. All these players who are pretty desirable despite this awful team. Like no depth. They haven't been playing well. Like they're maybe going to challenge for the most losses ever. You just like something needs to change. They don't have a good farm system. They needed to do more than they did. It felt like they had this idea for what they needed to get for their players. Honestly, like they were probably getting pretty good offers because look at the offers that came through for players who did trade, who did move. Like Yusei Kikuchi is not as good, I don't think, as Fetty or Crochet. He got a nice return. Jack Flaherty got a less nice, but still pretty nice return. There were ways to get trades done that would benefit everyone. And I think they just held out for like things that don't make sense and ended up just like stuck as a result. What other team is the biggest loser? I mean, this one's a little speculative and maybe a little bit biased by the fact that I usually think they do so much better, but I didn't love what the Rays did. There's two players who I feel like have been huge Rays success stories, really emblematic of what they do well in the past few years, and that's Randy Arozarena. A thing that they do really well is kind of identify misvalued, stuck prospects. And that was basically Arozarena. He was stuck on the Cardinals. Like right away, his projections were really good. Not as good as he's ended up, but right away it was like, oh, wait, this guy's like an above average player. And then they improved him by working with him to kind of accentuate his strengths and minimize his weaknesses. That's a good thing that Rays do. They don't like just like magically make over players. They like work with them. Hey, focus on what you're good at. Let's do more of that. Like let's find ways to make that tool shine more. Um, and so it's not that he's most valuable to the Rays, but they found a way to kind of like make him shine. But he was already like undervalued. Isaac Paredes, very similar. When he came over there, he was, most statistical models would say he was better than Austin Meadows, who he got traded for. Like, just better today. Um, he had like 100 bad at bats in the majors, so like no one cared. But like that was just, picking up coins on the ground because no one wants them. It was just like these players are good, and for whatever reason, their teams don't want them, so we'll take them. And in exchange, they often send out players who are as advertised. And I think you can argue that Arozarena is now as advertised. And Paredes is maybe underrated in the broader community because he seems kind of gimmicky. But they traded Arozarena like for cheap because they didn't want to pay his salary, and they traded Paredes because I don't entirely understand it. It's like he's been producing for and they didn't have to. They could just keep having him as someone who the industry values like a 2-win player, but who produces like a 4-win player. Like, great. That's what the Rays are built on. They find all these guys who the industry values like a 1 or 2-win player and who produce like a 3 or 4-win player. That's awesome. Like, it works so well for them. But I feel like this deadline, they decided, hey, we need to retool. We're not going to make the playoffs. Part of being the Rays is retooling. And they called other teams. Other teams were like, well, we don't really have a lot for you for these guys. Like, we still don't value Paredes that much. Like a Rosarena, and he's getting kind of close to free agency. He's having a down year. Usually the Rays are the ones who are like, sorry, you have a 4-win player who people think is bad. We'll trade for him. Or like, you have a guy who had a down first half, but who is like a 30% above average hitter over the last 4 years. We'll trade for him. Like, because you don't value him enough. But I think they found themselves in this spot where like they're really good at finding those guys, so they already found them all. Like those guys were just on the Rays. That's how the Rays build their team. They didn't happen to have a lot of the like hot commodities, but they had told themselves, we got to sell. Like, we got to do something to like push value out of this year into the future. This year's bad. We need to keep replenishing the farm system. They made some trades I like. Like, I think a lot of their reliever trades worked really well. They understood there, like, we know which guys to trade. The market's hot. Let's get these guys out of here. Let's find some new people for them who won't be as good right now, but that we think we can coach up. But I think they just got like so focused on like, we must push value to the future. We must cut payroll. We must change the shape of our organization. And they didn't have the right guys to do that. So it's kind of like I liked the strategy, but they had the wrong pieces to execute it. And I'm not sure what they should have done, but I think that this outcome didn't do a very good job for them, I guess I would say.
With all of the analysts in Major League Baseball and every single organization, I mean, it's just hard, I think, for most people to be like, man, how are their teams just undervaluing certain players? Like, how are and in
Yeah.
your opinion, like why is that? Because every team has all these analysts, there's numbers everywhere. It's they're doing this full time. I mean, they have tons and tons of people doing this full time. Like, why is there certain organizations that maybe more times than not undervalue certain players? Is there certain statistics they're not looking at?
Um, I don't think it's that. I think that this is actually a something that matters in baseball analysis too, like public side analysis. As I mentioned, there's no shortage of analysis you can do, right? There's all kinds of data. You can run all kinds of studies. Um, the real problem is that there's too much, not that there's too little.
Mhm.
It's not like people aren't looking at enough statistics. People are looking at too many statistics. There's too much stuff. And it's not that they're looking at too many, but they don't do a good job of like cutting out the noise and focusing on the ones that matter. And the ones that matter aren't always the same. And that's always kind of
Yeah.
tough. Like like projection systems are not perfect. And understanding when to ignore what they're saying or understanding why they might have a hole is really important. Paul Skeens is not projected to be very good by either Steamer or Zips, the two best public projection systems, I think. But that's stupid. Um, like that's stupid. I think that's obvious. Like Paul Skeens is really good. The problem is that the systems just don't work because the way that they work, they're like looking at past comparables and like, okay, do you have any? I,
I
like,
mean,
no.
yeah, I
It's
don't.
tough. Like you have, it's very difficult to fold enough stuff in to deal with kind of singular people. And I think the projection systems often break down around that. I mean, one thing that the Rays do really well is they understand how to avoid recency bias. Like lots of times that they trade for guys, they're trading for guys whose projections are improving because they're performing really well. And they're trading for guys whose projections are declining because they're playing really badly. But they just kind of understand like these things are a snapshot in time. Like you got to think about their whole track record and you have to take that into account like holistically. I think the Rays are pretty good at like looking at the whole picture and then saying, well, we really care about these two things. Let's let it go. Like I think Paredes is a great example. was a really good minor league performer with really good like projections as a result. And he had played badly in the majors for the Tigers in some short stints, but also there were reasons to doubt him, like from the scouting side. Uh, he, you watch him swing, he doesn't swing hard. He's not like physically imposing, and like obviously we like the guys who are just like ripped and blazing fast because if they harness it, there's just more upside, right? Like when Julio Rodriguez is clicking, he's just capable of doing a lot more than Isaac Paredes. And that's just really obvious. He's just like everything, all his tools are so much louder. And so Paredes was like a tools light guy uh who hadn't performed well in the majors. And it's easy to like say, okay, this is a time where I want to ignore the projection systems. I get the pattern. He doesn't have a natural position. He doesn't fit our roster. And that's another thing that the Rays are pretty smart about, understanding like we'll move the roster to find the undervalued guys. A lot of teams are like, well, we have a crunch, so like we got to send out this guy. We know we're giving away a good guy. Um, got to perform a little more Tetris there. But really, they're good at saying like, we understand that these are the extenuating circumstances that would make you like treat this player as either better or worse than kind of a reasonable central tendency. But we'll just deal with those extenuating circumstances. That's fine with us. I think that they're really smart about kind of understanding like which of the extra data points they can say, we'll toss those. Like, let's disregard those. We don't need them as much. We're using them in a different context. I mean, interestingly, Paredes looks nothing like he did as a prospect. But I think that one thing that was the case there is, look, if you're as good as he was in the minors, I'm gonna pull up these statistics really quickly because he was like it's really, now he's like a power goof. He just hits home runs. That's like his thing. When he was in the minor leagues, he was not a super big power guy. He was more of like a like high walks, low strikeouts BABIP guy, which now he's not a BABIP guy, but he's still high walks, low strikeouts, great bat control, great approach. And I think they just said anyone who performs like that with like great bat control, great approach can figure it out. Like really one thing that the minor leagues are good for is for looking for tools. And you'll talk to lots of scouts who are great at scouting tools. And another thing that the minor leagues are good for is like seeing which players are good, seeing which players perform really well. And like he performed really well. And I think that they were smart enough to say, I'm willing to bet on that performance being because he's a good player with like lots of baseball skills, even if those baseball skills are not immediately obvious to us. Um, there was this old model at Fangraphs called Cato. I don't remember what it stands for, but it was run by this guy Chris Mitchell, who I believe works for the Twins now. He's like a really good data scientist, basically. And he at first was just using statistical models to try to figure out how good minor leaguers will be. And he'd come up with projections for them based on that. And it was pretty good. And then he started doing what's called Cato Plus, where he folded in like scouting grades. And it was better. And so like that's pretty cool. You can actually use what scouts are saying to improve how good your model will do. And like that was a really, I thought, like validating to what scouts are doing. Like it was obvious. Like I would be shocked if that weren't the case, but he proved it. Like he put in the scouting grades and it improved his projections, but it didn't replace his projections. In fact, the projections were still very like what they had done in the minors and which skills in the minors were most translatable to the majors were still really important. And so like I think that that's kind of what happens here is some teams say, okay, well, I understand the projections, but they miss on guys. And like here are some reasons that like we think they're missing on this guy. And our scouts agree. And the Rays are willing to say, yeah, that might be the case, but we'll take the bet. They're not always right, but I think they're just really smart about kind of understanding what matters, what doesn't at the end of the day. And that's why there's overvalued and undervalued players. Another one is like Paredes is a good example. Maybe his park matters. And so I think that he can be projected. He is projected always to do really well, but teams are just really hesitant because even though it keeps happening, it feels flimsy. And that often makes players undervalued. Like guys who do well in context, but aren't maybe context neutral incredible. Jock Peterson, let's say, like great righty mashing DH. But I think that he often gets smaller contracts than he deserves, less credit than he really deserves, because people say, oh, well, he couldn't play a bigger role. And honestly, they're probably right in that case. Like he is really optimized at this little role. And so people really worry about like, well, how would he do in a wider context? Like, is it actually appropriate to say that Jock Peterson's the best hitter in the Diamondbacks? Well, no. Like they just kind of protect him and use him the right way, or like the best offensive player. And that could be tough. And there's a little bit of art to it. And I don't know why the Rays particularly are so good at it, but they really are.
Interesting. You had mentioned earlier that there's certain statistics that you should use versus you shouldn't use in projecting players, but that at the same time that can also change. Are there certain things though that stay the same, and that there's certain things you look at no matter what?
Um, I would say that the ability to make like very valuable contact uh, and for hitters is very important. You can figure out different ways you want to define that. And I do think that what's repeatable in that changes over time. So it's important to always be looking for like making sure that things are still stable. There's this there's this StatCast stat barrels, which is basically a ball hit very hard at like line drive and low fly ball angles. And your ability to do that in 1 year is very predictive of your ability to do it in the future.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that is one where like if you are able to turn a lot of your swings into barrels, that's a really good sign that you'll be able to do that in the future. Whereas like your ability to hit line drives overall is much less stable season to season. So looking at things like that, like basically value of contact, I think is pretty important for a hitter, and tends to be pretty stable. Like if you're thinking about someone's chase rate, that sounds really important, and it is. Like yeah, it just is. But that can be an approach thing, and it can change really quickly. Like without any underlying skill change, a player could just be like, "Well, I'm just going to swing less." Like I'm going to go up there and I'm going to act like it's 1-0 like every pitch until I get the two strikes, let's say. And that's going to change his statistics like pretty meaningfully. And maybe it won't change his outcome and maybe it will. But that's something where you could say, oh, like players with good chase traits tend to be good. And all of a sudden, Javi Baez is chasing less, so he's going to be better. Well, maybe. But that's one where it's not clear. Like maybe his chasing less is taking him away from his natural approach. Um, I mentioned Brent Rooker earlier. Brent Rooker doesn't change his approach very much with two strikes. And that's interesting because talk to any coach and they're going to say, change your approach when you get the two strikes, right? Like defend the plate, like cut your swing down. And major leaguers do that because, I mean, it makes sense. The swinging and missing with two strikes is so much worse than with one strike. It's a strikeout versus a strike. And so you should, like, the incentives change, yours should change. But Rooker doesn't change his, and he just swings really hard, and it's working for him. And I think the reason for that is because he does not have a B swing. If he was taking B swings, it wouldn't really work. So much of his game is focused on elevating and doing damage. Like, do you really want to be Brent Rooker, who still has some chase issues, still has plenty of contact issues, trying to take soft swings? Like, who cares? Like, it's just not that valuable for him to put the ball in play with a soft swing. Um, and so that's an example of a statistic that is very contextual and that you could look at one player and say this approach works for him. But I would never try to identify players who are good based on having an approach like Rooker. Whereas one thing that you might say is, man, this guy hits the crap out of the ball when he connects. Like per swing, he does a lot of damage. Okay, that's going to be stable. Now, if I were on, the A's, I would try to find a way to maximize that skill. Like look for what's stable, look at what skills are really sitting there from 1 year to the next and are likely to, and then build the game around that. Because it's hard to build a game around an approach. It can change a lot and pitchers can attack you differently. Build a game around like the stable skills. Very similarly for pitching, I think that you really want to look for like not so much like how you pitch, like, oh, are you pitching backwards? Are you attacking like really high in the zone with two strikes and low in the zone with one? Like look for the building block pitches, the things that are more repeatable. Oh, this guy has like a fastball with a ton of backspin. Awesome. Like let's try to build the way he pitches around that. This guy has great like glove side command. Okay, cool. Let's figure out a way that we can work with that. Those things tend to be more stable. I don't have a great way to measure command, so I would not write about that. But teams, I feel like, do a better job of that and can work with the guy more specifically. And I think the smart teams are picking stable skills and then trying to maximize those, trying to like get the most out of the things people do well and hide the things they don't do so well. I mean, relief pitcher usage, you see this a lot, right? Like the Rays are really smart, and actually, increasingly, teams are really smart about thinking about which shapes hitters do well against and bring in their pitchers that don't throw those pitch shapes against them. Like, don't bring in a guy who throws low in the zone and tries to control there against Bryce Harper. That's bad. Like, that's just, even if he's a lefty, that's a bad idea. And I think teams used to do that more. And now they're saying, like, hey, I'm going to bring in a guy who has a stable throw high in the strike zone skill because I know that Harper is a better swinger low. It's little things like that, like trying to figure out what your guys do well sustainably. And that's, again, like pitch shape. Um, it can be command, but less so approach. Like, sorry, is command like throwing it where you want to go and control is throwing in the zone? I always mix these up.
Say that again.
So like I always mix up like command versus control. I don't know which one's which, but like throwing the ball where you want to is different from not walking anybody. Uh
Yeah. I mean, I view command yeah, exactly. Like just being able to just fill up the zone, like knowing where you're throwing the pitches, even if that means you're throwing a ball, but maybe you're throwing it there on purpose, that type of a thing.
yeah. So I'd say like not like whether you're like low walk rate or high walk rate is kind of related to throwing the ball where you want, but it's not only. Like Blake Snell is a great example of this. I think he has fairly good command. He just chooses to throw a lot of balls and make it miserable to watch him, despite it working. Like it works for him. It's just a boring watch. Um, but I think that command is stable, and like teams often identify that. Oh, like Snell is a good example. Like we know that this guy has pretty good command of his breaking balls. Let's build a game that emphasizes that. And that is like burying stuff in the chase zone and like trying to get people to chase because he can pretty consistently throw that like strike to ball slider. Cool. Okay, let's build the game around that. Or like this guy is pretty good at keeping his fastball above the zone. Okay, cool. Let's build the game around that. Hitters can be good at like adjusting to make contact. They can be good at pulling and lifting. Um, yeah, those kinds of skills, the more stable ones, are really what you want to focus on. And not to the exclusion of all else, but kind of. I like to look at like 1 to 2 skills per hitter or per pitcher and say like that's what I like. There are exceptions. Like Mookie Betts is just a freak. I don't know, like yeah, teach your players to be Mookie Betts. That would be a good rule. You just can't do it. There are always like Jose Ramirez. He has like 17 great skills. It's kind of crazy. I don't know how he keeps doing it, but he just does. But you'll know when you have one of those guys, I think, as a team. And as an analyst, you'll realize when you have one of those guys because you keep doing analysis and you're like, well, he keeps breaking it. Like no one can actually combine these two skills except like these 5 guys. Oh, look, some of these are the best athletes in the world. But yeah, for most players, like not like most players are not Mookie Betts. Most players have a few carrying tools, and learning which ones are valuable and learning how to accentuate them is, I think, something that goes a long way towards like cutting through the noise of data.
I think in my opinion, I think pitching is easier to develop than hitting. I don't think there's a lot of people who would even argue with that. Is there a point in what you've seen when it comes to like hitters developing at the major league level? Like, okay, they get to this age, there's no data that supports that this skill is going to get any better, whether that be swing decisions or bat to ball skills. Like, is there anything like that you see?
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a longish answer here. I guess I just like longish answers. So I have been running this long time project where I built some like machine learning models to try to look at minor league stats and predict who would have a major league career based on those minor league stats. And it's kind of like an ensemble model. I made like 4 or 5 different ones because they all say different things. And I didn't go into it with any like conviction about which one was going to be right. So I just like used a bunch. Um, One thing that those models agreed on, and I trained them on basically like the 2000s, like minor leaguers in the like from 2000 to 2012 or something, how likely they were based on their various minor league stats to stick in the majors. And one thing that really stood out is that at low levels of the minors, contact matters a ton. Um, if you can't make contact in A ball, you will not be a good major leaguer. Like there are very few good major leaguers who were striking out 30% of the time at A ball. It's just like if you can't avoid swinging at the bad pitches from those guys, you just do not have a relevant skill to make the majors. Now, if you looked at major leaguers, you would say strikeout rate doesn't matter that much because some of the best hitters have high strikeout rates, some of the bad hitters have low strikeout rates. There's very little correlation between strikeout rate and production in the majors. And you'd say, huh, that's weird. But basically, that's because they all have good enough bat to ball skills that their strikeout rates are much more a correlation, much more a product of other stuff than like not having the bat to ball to be in the majors. If you're going to strike out 30% of the majors and succeed, you are not striking out 30% of the time at single A. Like it's very rare for that to happen. Very rare. Maybe you were 18 and playing way ahead of your level, but all of my models were like, hey, if you strike out too much in the minors, like it's just over. Like
And when you say
uh,
strike out too much, is that swinging at pitches that nobody could hit outside the zone, or is that swinging and misses at pitches in the actual strike zone?
well, I don't have the data. So the old minor league data is not broken down that way. It's not pitch by pitch. So I couldn't tell you. And that's part of the reason that what I'm going to say is so that was all true like from 2000 to 2012, let's call it. And it was interesting because then you'd get the double A and triple A, and the weights that my model put on strikeout rate went way down. Because once you get the triple A, it's pretty close to the majors. And if you're good at hitting, then you'll probably be able to hit in the majors. It's just interesting how the tools that the models care about change based on level. And then now you get to the present day, and the predictive ability of this model has gone way down. And the reason is teams are getting better at this stuff, right? Teams are answering the question that you're asking me. Is it swinging at things way out of the zone? Is it not being able to hit pitches in the strike zone? And they're learning like which ones are more important. And they actually are keeping all this data. And they are now able to focus on the skills that matter. They're able to pick the players who are going to succeed better and more quickly. And the correlations that used to hold are all gone. Not totally gone, but increasingly gone. Scouts are getting better at this stuff too. There's like Eric Longenhagen, our lead prospect analyst. Uh, when I joined Fangraphs, Eric, one of the main things Eric did was watch players in person and talk to other scouts about what they thought. And he still does those things. But another thing that he does a lot of now is source TrackMan data and find the actual raw like tools and statistics and batted balls and like spin rates on pitches and like contact rate in the zone and contact rate out of the zone on minor leaguers. And it's really kind of revolutionizing what we know about people. Like you'll look at guys and say his in zone contact rate is awful. He's just doomed. Like like this guy just can't hit a fastball down the middle. So we're just not interested. I used like I didn't have the ability to say that because the data just wasn't there. So I guess what I'd say is teams are getting so much better at kind of breaking down which skills matter and which don't, and learning different ways to train which skills matter, like train the skills that matter. That I think that this stuff is very unstable over time. Like you could run a pretty good front office 10 years ago with a good understanding of statistics and machine learning. Machine learning just means regressions to me, like just the ability to run a bunch of regressions and think about them. And you could try to develop based off that. But development has advanced so much that I am not confident that the same skills are the ones that'll get you ahead. I think teams have gotten better about teaching approach. You know, the Orioles have this scoring system, right? They like literally gamify swing decisions, and they base it on like your hot zones, and they tell you like, oh, like that was a green, like great decision. This is like a yellow, you go to away. That was red, bad decision. And they give people scorecards after games, and it's changed people's ability to change their approach. Um, so what matters the most has changed a bunch, I think, actually. And I am not confident that I am good at picking it out in the minors anymore. I used to think that I was very good at it, but I think the skills that matter the most just may not be the same, and teams are definitely teaching them differently. I think that's pretty cool. Uh, but yeah, it's always changing. That's one of the great things about baseball. Like how many smart people are on these teams, not like doing data work, meh, like boring. Like there's smart people doing that. How many smart people are on these teams teaching hitters how to get better at hitting? Like lots. And technology is exploding. So it's massively increasing your ability to do that. I I hope that hitting starts to get more of the technological advance that pitching did. Like you said, it's just easier to develop pitching. But I do think that there's been a lot of like advanced understanding of how you can change different tools, train for swing speed, train for approach that just wasn't this wasn't done before.
Yeah, it's almost like, it's also hard because it's so player dependent too, like in terms of like, what you're going to
Yes.
focus on from a development standpoint. If is it swing decisions, is it not? That was very interesting. You brought about, lower level in the minor leagues. If you're swinging and striking out too much, like that's just you're not going to end up making it to the major leagues and be successful. Um, what's one way that you've seen, or maybe that you have like quantified swing decisions? Because I was reading an article that you did probably like 2 years ago. I think it was 2022,
Mhm.
about swing decisions specifically, and you got pretty in depth on how you went about quantifying that. Could you talk everybody through that?
Yeah. This is a tough thing, and I've never found one that I think is perfect. I will say Robert Orr over at Baseball Prospectus had a pretty good like quantification method. I think it's called Seeger, and it's like selective aggression. The idea is Corey Seager makes good swing decisions, but if you just looked at chase rate, you wouldn't find that because he chases a lot. Because he is trying to hit pitches early in the count really hard. And so he's just very aggressive about what he's looking for. And he makes up for the high chases with a ton of good swings. Um, I think he kind of understands that his approach is not great with two strikes, or like his strengths are not emphasized by two strikes. And so he should be hunting stuff early in the count. I do a bunch of different things to try to look at good approach, bad approach, because it's like I have not found a good way to quantify it. Like in a one size fits all way. One thing that I really like doing is looking at the trade-off between production on like swings of basically like you can change your swing rate, but you can't just say like I want to swing more at pitches over the heart of the plate and leave everything else the same. Like, cool, okay, I'd like to do that too. Or like I want to chase less, but still be just as aggressive in the strike zone. Great. Like just get better. Okay. Not helpful. Um, I one thing I like doing is looking at the relative cost of a bad take or a bad swing. So like go through each zone. Like what does it cost you to take instead of swing down the middle? What does it cost you to take instead of swing on the edges? What does it cost you to swing instead of take off the plate? And kind of look at the trade-off that you're making there. So there are some players where it doesn't actually cost you as much as you'd think to do one of the wrong things. Like if you have no power and just not a lot of contact quality, it's less painful to miss a swing down the middle. Because, like, let's be real. Like, Nick Madrigal not hitting that one out. Is just, he'd like to, obviously, and he's trying hard to. He just does not have the physical tools to. So for him, a good approach probably involves being a little bit more passive. Um, then you've got guys, we'll just stick with Rooker. I mean, there's a lot of good examples of this in the past where you have this like colossal power, but problems missing. And for them, it's like less disastrous to chase a ball, to be honest with you, because when pitchers come after them, they're still gonna miss fairly often. Like Brent Rooker and I mean Javi Baez is the extreme, like the most extreme version of this. Like he's just not gonna walk. Rooker is walking 10% of the time this year, and that's despite pitchers being absolutely terrified of this guy. And like not wanting to throw him any strikes at all. It's very hard for him to walk because his swing is so all or nothing and because he wants to get it off really well. And so that actually like emphasizes aggression because it's less valuable for him to make the right decision and take a ball, less costly for him to make the bad decision. So he should be more aggressive. So I think that's one thing that you should really do is like look at the difference in like values between these. And actually like it's different for every player. Like if you're a guy, I mean Jose Ramirez, to go back to him, he's a pretty good bad ball hitter. Um, and so it is much less costly for him to accidentally swing at one that's like, up at the letters or down at his ankles. Because of his ability to like really flex his body and get the barrel on the ball at a lot of different places. He has a very like malleable swing. He's able to generate his full swing with the bat head in all kinds of different places. it's less costly for him to swing at a bad pitch. And so he can kind of, I mean, he can almost do what he wants because he's just really good, but it makes sense for him to be willing to be a little more aggressive because it just costs him. It is really bad for Jose Ramirez to miss a hittable pitch because he does damage when he hits. And so if you look at it over time, his swing rate has just gone up and up and up. And I think that's because he's a really smart player and he kind of understands, oh, like the trade-off is actually not so bad when I take a bad swing. Ozzy Albi is very similar kind of player with less power, but similar idea where he has this very versatile swing. Tim Anderson, when he was really good, there are these guys who, like, just because of the nature of their swing, you look at it and the trade-off is less meaningful, less meaningfully bad to swing at a ball. And those guys, I think, should be more aggressive. I think Seager is trying to do a similar thing, the Robert Orr one, and I think that's a good way to look at it. I think you almost just have to look case by case, but like think of it from that context. How bad is it to swing at a bad pitch? How bad is it to take a good pitch for this player in particular? Because there's no one size fits all for the league. I think if you only look at like league wide averages for those, you're going to come up short. Look at what that player does when he swings at bad pitches. Look at what that player does when he takes good pitches.
One player that I've been looking at is Ellie De La Cruz. And so I was looking at some of his, swing decisions from 2023 to 2024 and
Yeah.
notice that his middle swing percentage is up about 10% this year and his chase is down about 6% this year, which I thought was interesting where it's, I don't know if there's that correlation, if it's, hey, because he's being more aggressive and swinging pitches right over the middle of the plate, that it's allowing him to take less pitches. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think he's just really good. I I think that he is 22 and learning how to switch hit in the major leagues. The one thing that I've always found very impressive about Ellie, I've been just like enraptured with him since he debuted in the majors. Just this guy, we were talking about the players with all the tools. When they get better, it's just gonna like the ceiling's higher. And I think that's a lot of what's going on with him. There is not, generally speaking, an approach way to start swinging more at pitches down the middle and less at bad pitches because that's kind of what pitching is doing, right? Like when you chase a pitch, generally what's happening is that the pitcher is trying to make that pitch look like it's going to be hittable, and then later it's not. And so if you're gearing up more, if you're less willing to take something down the middle, you just need to either get started earlier or think swing more. And that's going to hurt you on not every pitch in the chase zone, but lots of pitches that pitchers get you to chase on are good pitches. Like they're good pitchers in the majors. It's full of them. That's how they got there. Lots of their pitches that you chase are going to start out looking like it's down the middle and turn into a ball. Like that's their skill. And you can't just like ignore that. On the other hand, Ellie is getting a massively increased amount of data on what good major league pitches look like. Because again, he's 21. He barely played in the minors. He played in 2019 at 17 in I think in Dominican Summer League. And then he played like a little bit in 2021 in like low A ball stuff. He just does not have a lot of experience seeing great major league pitches. And he's a switch hitter, so it doubles the amount of data you need to collect to be able to see it all because you're seeing it from a different perspective with a different dominant eye. I think a lot of what's going on there is that he's just getting better. Like he's just getting a lot more reps. I do think that he is working a little bit more with the approach of like, I do a ton of damage when I connect. So let's keep swinging a lot and like accept the strikeouts. So like you said, his chase rate is way down. Just pretty impressive, honestly. Like I think that's a really cool thing he's done. But his swinging strike rate is up. And that's because I think he has really said, like, I'm trying to do damage. Like that's the thing that I'm good at. And when I'm hitting a ball in the strike zone, I'm going to clobber it and it's going to just hurt the other team. I'm going to make them throw me balls. Like I'm going to make them throw me non-competitive pitches because they're scared of me. And if I swing and miss a little bit, that's okay. So you look at it and you're like, well, he's chasing less. He's swinging pitches down the middle more. That should be good. Like that should be, his strikeout rate should go way down. It hasn't gone down much. And I think that's because he's really said, I'm not prioritizing contact. I'm not prioritizing laying off things. I'm going to try to hit scalded line drives and turn them into triples, turn them into home runs. And that approach is really good for him, I think. And I think that he's always going to be kind of high strikeout as a result. But also, yeah, he's just getting better at pitch recognition, and maybe he's going to be the best player in baseball soon. We'll see.
Yeah, for the kids listening at home, you don't necessarily want to copy the freaks that we're talking
Yeah,
about, like in terms
yeah.
of their approach. Like just because Ellie De La Cruz is just trying to hit bombs doesn't mean that that's going to be the best approach for you.
Yes, that is a really good point. Like that kind of ties into all this. Like your approach should take into account what you can do, and his does. And what he can do is very impressive. So it makes a lot of sense that he did it that way.
Ben, this has been a ton of fun, man. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. Great stuff. You put out great content on Fangraphs. If someone wants to follow you, like where should they go?
Honestly, they should go to Fangraphs.
Okay.
It's amazing. It is free. Like we would love for you to be a subscriber if you think it is something that you enjoy. Subscribers keep our website going. However, all of the content that we produce is available for free. So if you want to check it out, if you want to see what we're doing, if you want to see prospect rankings that are updated all the time with our 3-person prospect team talking to team scouts and doing their own research, that's there. If you want to see the best public projections that there are, they're free. They're just on our website. Probably 6, 7 articles a day of baseball content of various types, up-to-date rosters. Fangraphs has everything. I would say go there, check it out. If you love baseball, you will probably find something to like at Fangraphs. We do a little bit of everything. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I mean, you can. It's _Ben_Clemens because Ben Clemens was taken. I mainly, promote Fangraphs because I think the website is the best thing going for baseball analysis.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.